Awesome.
All right. Are you ready for me, James? Or
Yeah, let me real quick frame this conversation. So I just want us to be thinking about like how can we hold the reality that the ministry that we do as BCM might even be bigger than just our BCM experience, our BCM fellowship, and we would be well to think through that. So anyway, I invited my brother Jamel in to help us hold that in a faithful way. So love this dude. I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll go from there.
appreciate it, James. We are some of the lone survivors on staff for a long time. I know it's 18 years for me. How long is it for you, James?
Got closed out 20 this year, so
I was down 20. Yeah, he was 2 years in when I came in. Man, yeah, just take a moment all the time. So basically, the ministry that I have at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, of course, my name is Jamel Morris, and the next slide, I get in detail with my family life. But just to kind of explain the ministry, it's built around 3 C's: Christ, culture, and community. The Christ aspect is we apply the scriptures to the cultural issues and concerns of primarily African-American students, but not limited to just African-American students. The community part is we've expanded our ministry to inner city middle schools, elementary schools, and high schools, where we teach male and female character confirming classes with the primary goal is to offset gang culture and other negative aspects that we saw in the personality of some of our young people. So what I'm gonna do here is, of course, you don't have to emulate everything, but there's like certain steps you can say, okay, I can use that. I can use that. I think that that'll be useful in my particular ministry space. But I'm just kind of going through how the biblical framework or the framework that I use to actually establish an urban initiative. But before I get to that, let me just explain family. I graduated from Lee University. I used to always put that up if I was doing a presentation to garnish resources. But anyway, but my wife, April Morris, and she's on the other side. That's my mother, right? You know, hope you can tell the difference between the two. She's teaches English as a secondary language, and she's been a grade school teacher for almost 20 years now. We have 2 daughters, Christine and Kayla, twin girls. And a quick story about that. I know I was on an actual fall conference when we found out my wife was pregnant, and she laid it on to me about the twin things, and and I didn't realize she had twins on both sides of her family. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Right. And you will find this funny, James. Joshua Settles was my area director at the time, and he knows how Joshua Settles is about kind of like not always been there on meetings. He came out in normal Joshua way. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I found out my wife's pregnant with twins." He said, "Stay out here as long as you want." He just walked back in. So that was quite hilarious. I'm the associate area director for Tennessee and Kentucky. That is our region. And I'm the founder of what I've just shared with you, Urban Initiative. So I'm going to go into some of the details. Like, this is not an exhaustive study of the book of Nehemiah, because that's the book that I actually created the framework to do Urban Initiative. And I kind of want this to be a somewhat interactive, so I need some enthusiastic scripture readers. We're not looking at the entire thing. We're just going to look at little parts. I say, hey, you read this, and I'm going to extract some of the steps that we use to actually go into the middle schools, the elementary schools, and also the high schools. So let me see if I get this right here. All right, so the first part of Nehemiah, I think some of us may know the background. They was all exiles. And Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king. He had a very prominent role and position. If we would look at that today, that would be like somebody in the special service or something. Like anything that could be potentially poisonous, Nehemiah had to take it first. Like they used to try to poison the king by poisoning his wine or something. So Nehemiah had to be a person of high integrity, even to have that role and position. But Nehemiah's homeland or his people was under a lot of distress, a lot of problems, the destruction of the temple, a lot of things has happened. And Nehemiah, I'm not going to detail this, Nehemiah could have easily said, kind of like some of our college students, not all of them, had an entitlement attitude. So I got a good job. Why do I care about what's going on back in the streets, right? I'm doing pretty well. So somebody read this first part, and then I'm going to extract some of the things I think are necessary before you move into predominantly Black spaces, whether that's on campus or in the city. So who wants to read Nehemiah? I got this thing in front of here. Nehemiah chapter 1, 3-4.
I'll hold this first one, and then
Okay.
somebody else in a minute. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven.
So one of the first things before you move into Black spaces is, I think, is the key thing is you have to actually be driven by a burden. And what I mean is that something, you have a deep conviction. You just don't want to kind of move in there, those spaces just to move in there, or, you know, the intent isn't right. But Nehemiah couldn't continue with his day-to-day. That even when he was trying to do his day-to-day, the king even noticed that his countenance had changed because his heart and his mind was with what was happening to his people. So in this particular thing, because I'm talking about how we move with young people, is that we have to be emotionally disturbed by the condition of our young people or Black students on campus. Emotionally disturbed means that, man, I really would like to see something different or something transformative in these particular spaces. And it's hard for you just to shake it off. It's like, I really want to see things in a very intimate way change. So that's the step one, is the burden has to be there. It precedes the call. Like, the burden actually leads you to the call. You know, so Nehemiah was a cupbearer, you know, that was his vocation, right? But the burden made him actually step outside his vocation to actually move on the call that God placed in his heart. So one of the things about, we're in Orchard Knob Middle School. We started in Dalewood Middle School. And if you look up at that first slide, sorry about that, that's a scam. Scam like Leah. With that first slide, Dalewood Middle School. And how many of y'all are familiar with Usher Raymond?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Entertainer, Usher Raymond, the singer. I know might be dated now, but
they
yeah.
call me us.
Yeah. So Usher Raymond, even though when he actually excelled in his career, he claimed Atlanta. He's from Chattanooga. He's from our city. So that's him at Dalewood Middle School. He actually purchased that sign. And he actually came the one Wednesday we didn't go, which was interesting, but was probably good because my students would have been distracted. But yeah, so what happened is we're in Dalewood Middle School and we're in Orchard Knob Middle School. And one of my male leaders actually did an analysis on those two particular schools. And this goes back to developing that burden. And what he found out is that Dalewood Middle School, out of 493 middle schools, was 485 is the lowest performing school in Tennessee. And Orchard Knob was 490th. The only schools that was lower performing than Orchard Knob Middle School was the School of the Deaf and the School for the Blind. Now, right there at these schools, there's a church like next door, like right next door to the school. And there's a church across the street from the school, right? But they actually gave me a tour of the school probably like 7 years ago, that they said that they didn't have enough chairs. They didn't have chairs actually to do their science projects. And they reached out to 27 churches about getting chairs to do their science projects. And they responded by, we'll pray about it, right? So right now, a lot of the students there are already developing the attitude about what Jesus is, what Christ is, what Christians are, based on what they did not receive. Not only them, but also the teachers or the faculty members and things like that. And that moves me to our next step. And you can read this part. Who else wants to read Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 16?
I can do it.
All right.
And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. And I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work.
Okay, so the next step is building a relationship with critical people. When you move into Black spaces, you have to be able to develop a good rapport with critical people within that space. In my situation, it was the dean of students, it was the principal, it was the different key faculty members, and things like that. And then even on campus, if you're reaching out to a particular Greek organization, you need to know the president. And it's not like a bait and switch, like I'm trying to build this relationship with you so you can become a part of our group, but it's actually building a relationship. And the people know the difference. If you're building a relationship just to say, hey, I want you to be a part of this group, or you build a relationship regardless if you're a part of this group or not. Because sooner or later it will pan out if you develop a strong rapport and a strong relationship with that particular person. Because whoever you're developing a relationship, particularly on campus, these are the people that's going to help you shape culture. These are the people that's going to help you shape the campus culture. These are the people that's going to help you do the work that you're doing. So yeah, that's the first one of the steps I had to do. Because at the time when I first started doing this, I was a youth pastor at New Monumental Baptist Church, and Delwood Middle School was directly down the street, and they called it Gang Initiating School. So I went in and I built a relationship with the principal. I shared with them who I am, and I asked them during their scheduled lunchtime, do you mind if I go in and just sit with the young people to hear some of their things, what they're doing and stuff like that? I'm not going to say turn or burn. I'm not coming in with this type of mindset of, hey, I'm just trying to preach this and preach that. But I just told him, hey, I just want to help, right? And once he allowed me to go in there, I'm going to move to my next slide, is that I began to notice a couple of things. And this is also coming from the book of Nehemiah. Who wants to read this part? Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 13.
I could.
All right.
I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down, and its gate had been destroyed by fire.
Okay, during this particular time, like once you build these critical relationships and you're allowed to go into these particular spaces, sometimes it's good not to always just talk. At times it's good to just be an active listener and observe, because you really don't know what's wrong until you actually listen and observe. So during this particular part of actually going to the middle school, I became an active listener. I sat with the middle school, some of the middle school young people who were actively in part of gang culture. And I would just listen to some of their gripes, some of their complaints, hear some of their frustrations. I remember one time, it was probably like 2 years ago, we had the middle school football quarterback. Had the coach was like, he has a bad attitude. He gets mad, he gets angry. And I just started listening to him. And one guy, he threw the ball and the guy didn't catch the ball, and he started cursing his receiver out. I'm like, well, yeah, it's there. Then he said, I put that on my dead father. I was like, okay. Mm-hmm. His father's probably my age and potentially died in an aggressive manner. And I asked him, have you know anything about this child's upbringing or his environment? Of course, the coach said no, because he was just focused on what he could do on the field. But that's observing. That's being an active listener. And what I always tell my students, I say, let's build fresh curriculum based upon the needs of the students we're actually reaching. Let's not come in with already an ideal of what we need to tell them. Let's listen. So even when you go into these spaces on campus, actually start listening to the concerns and gripes. And I have some of them that I can share with you as far as like when you go into maybe the fraternities, maybe the Black Student Union. There are certain things that ideals that some of, not all, may have about campus ministers, campus ministry, and Christianity too. So one of 4 questions I will always ask myself when I go into these particular spaces is I ask myself, what are the problems? And the next thing is, what caused the problems? And the final thing is, what are the biblical and cultural solutions? The biblical solution is I believe the Bible is written down in certain patterns, that if you follow certain patterns of the Bible, you can actually see similarities to what's going on today. And not only can you find similarities, you can find actually solutions and answers. Like especially with the book of Nehemiah, it almost predicted, like if you ever read the book of Nehemiah, it's this group of guys called Sanballat and Tobias. They're like opposition to his work. It almost predicted what I experienced. I said, oh shoot, this is the Sanballat and Tobias phase, right? But you can see basic patterns in our life actually in the text. And I think it's our job as ministers of the gospel is learn how to translate that thing to a way that it makes sense. So once you find out and the cultural solutions are that the unique thing about African-American culture is that because we came here under oppression, we have a lot of solutions in our past that we can actually extract now and can potentially be useful. Like even when I was making an appeal to a lot of the Greek organizations, a lot of those organizations started out as Christian organizations. And a lot of them started out with community activism. They just kind of lost their way. And how I got that is because even with Dr. Martin Luther King, one thing that he would do to with America, he always go to the Constitution and say, just be true to who you are on paper. So the same thing I was doing with the Greek organization, I'd be true to your origins. And I start understanding their origins, how they started, and I start knowing their stuff a little bit better than them, not arrogantly, but just say, hey, your organization is a community-based organization, not just built on entertainment and parties. Of course, I didn't say that part until I got real close to them, the entertainment and parties, but you get the gist, right? So once you understand once you get an idea of the biblical solutions and the cultural solutions, the next thing is how can they be implemented? And one of the things is you still have to learn how to implement it properly. And I, every day when I'm in the middle schools, I always have to learn something different. Like at one point I brought all these journals and I said, okay, I want y'all to write out, the different frustrations, different things. And I noticed nobody was writing. Why? Because written communication at this time frustrates them. And they was mad that I actually was telling them to do something that they're angry about. But when I said, let's just talk about, let's do this, they was all the way open. So I'm just going to show a quick breakdown of some of the problems and what caused the problems that I saw with a lot of students that I work with in the middle school. Is one of them was a lack of role models. That we believe in a holistic ministry, so we don't just hang around the students like during their scheduled time in school. We also go out to their basketball games, football games, and different activities. I have like 20, 27 college students with signs and everything. Just let them know we're there to support them. And I remember one time, and the reason why I did that, because I remember they was going against a private school. One of the Orchard Middle School was. And I noticed on the private school side, they had families, they had everybody rooting the team on. And then we looked at Orchard Middle School side, which was a home game. They only had like a mother, and the mother would just say, don't hurt my baby, right? And anybody who competed in sports know that that's not a motivating factor to actually win the game. So I said, okay, let's go ahead and just fill this up with college students. Let's fill this up with college students. And the girls' game, they actually won because in middle school, it's not always about talent. Sometimes the crowd can actually sway how the end results. And they actually won the game. Why? Because they actually saw somebody there that was actually cheering and rooting for them. Low racial esteem. This is extremely important. When you go into predominantly Black spaces, low racial esteem means everything that's been tied to their skin color has been tied to something negative. So like when they say that's a Black neighborhood, a lot of people think that's a bad neighborhood, or that's a Black organization. A lot of people think that's a negative organization, or that's Black music. Oh, it's filled with this and this. So anything that is tied to their skin color is tied to something negative. Like even when I go into the middle school, if they really want to talk bad about somebody, they always say your mama's so Black, and the Blacker your mama is, the worse off she is, which is still putting this negative stigma on their skin color, their hair, the way they look, everything. It becomes something like, oh, I just feel like what I am is not what really works in society. So low racial esteem is something I definitely notice. Vacant esteem basically is a step below low self-esteem. Vacant esteem is a deep sense of emptiness. I remember I was on my way to an InterVarsity conference, and the dean of students called me. She said, can you please come to the middle school? Like half our 8th graders are contemplating suicide, 8th grade boys. And 3 of them tried it. One of them succeeded, and I was on my way to a conference. I felt bad because I felt like the Samaritan passage where, the Levite and the priest was on their way to the temple and couldn't help the broken person in the street, right? But, our obligation for InterVarsity, I said, I'm sorry, I'm off to a conference. But when the person actually committed, it hit me hard. But anyway, but vacant esteem means that there's this complete emptiness there. There's nothing there. A lot of this is enforced by society. Some of this is enforced by the brokenness of the community, and other parts that are from the brokenness of some of their families. And a lot of the young people, and this could even be like some of the college students, that they feel a strong sense of abandonment, that nothing seems to be stable in their life. And usually they find themselves controlled by their peer group, meaning their peer groups dictate what's right and what's wrong, not the teachers, not the church, not things like that. Is what their peers. If their peers deem this is to be right, that's usually what they'll agree that's right. Which in our case, and I'm gonna get to the campus part too, but our case with the middle schoolers, it always leads to poor academics and poor behavior, and then eventually dropout culture, where they just check out the whole thing. So this is a summer camp we did this summer for all these young people right here. We did one for the males and one for the females with my college students. Of course, I had to sign off on a different organization because you can't do whitewater rafting as an InterVarsity staff worker. So, so yeah, so this wasn't, it was still me and still my college students, but they signed off under another
varsity.
Yeah, because you can't do that with that. But it was great because the whitewater rafting, we did whitewater rafting, zip lining. We had an entire 2 weeks of just like training and things like that. But it took them outside their environment. And with whitewater rafting, not saying you should do this with your leadership team, but it does teach them to listen. Because if you don't listen on the raft, you will go overboard, right? So when the instructor says go right and you go left, because I had one of my students who used to be a gang member. He was kind of hard-headed. He didn't listen. He went over, right? And but now he listens a lot. So it's a great teaching method. I say don't use it because you can't do it in InterVarsity. But if you sign off to another nonprofit, feel free to use that as leadership training. So what are biblical solutions? So one of the solutions, the lack of role models, and this is where you probably can like reach out to certain organizations on campus, is I began to reach out to other organizations on campus. And this is kind of just when I went to the different organizations. We have an organization called Unique Perceptions, which is primarily African-American women. We got the NAACP. We got Scholarly Men in Action. We got the Divine Nine, that's the fraternities, the sororities. We got Brother to Brother. So I began to reach out to these organizations, and I had this, and I just pulled together this thing and explained to them exactly what we was doing. And I, the training and stuff, I did observation. We know the OIA, but I use the OIA in kind of more like real life, where you're just observing the behaviors and the actions of students. You're interpreting and find out what God, y'all know this part, right? And how to apply it. So I'm getting to the point of what happens though. When you bring a lot of groups in, this is where my Bible studies came in at. So I'm reaching out to these groups. And the reason why I got the talented 10th, that came from the mindset of W.E.B. Du Bois, where he believed that 10% of African Americans, what he considered the most educated, would actually relieve the other 90% of self-sabotaging behavior patterns and actions. So, but what I noticed is a lot of them had problems with what I represented, right? So some of them had problems with Christianity. And usually when we engage with a group that may think different than us, we retreat. But this was a perfect opportunity to do the other part, which are my Bible studies, which is based on the cultural issues and concerns of the college students. So all our Bible studies are based on issues and concerns that college students have brought up. So they had problems with Christianity. They assumed Christianity was irrelevant, judgmental, misogynist, ignore or responsible for cultural issues, and very Eurocentric. So all our Bible study feminine, I couldn't see that, but all these things that they really had, and we will build different Bible studies around a lot of their issues. And I usually let them actually introduce the issues, and then I actually develop the Bible study around whatever they say, hey, this is the problem. And now you got high identity. When I say high identity, that means they're mostly associated with predominantly Black organizations on campus wanting to come to your Bible study because you're saying something that they're actually at, where the problems are that they actually have. And they actually have problems with each other too. I didn't realize that. I've had to navigate a lot of different conflicts even between the groups. I remember the UTC basketball team was at war with the Omegas, and they got into a fight, and then they reached out to me to be the mediator. And the only reason why a lot of the students reach out to me is because I've done the due diligence. They see me as a person that actually that cares, or a community-based pastor, I would say. So we build Bible studies about conflict, how to deal with conflict. If your brother offends you, should you go to social media? Should you go this, or should you go to the actual person? We went through all that. So we basically build Bible studies around that. The male and female relationship, man, I didn't realize how bad this was in certain spaces. They don't really dig each other like that. Because they actually have a thing on campus where it's actually labeled like relationship wrecks or something. And they just go there just to hash out how they don't like the opposite sex. And so build your Bible studies around that, the male and female relationships, the importance of it, or why is it unique? Why do we need these things to happen? Or how did this breakdown or this tension come about? So I've seen it in a lot of the organizations, you have either very narcissistic individuals within the organization, or those who have extremely low racial esteem. And what I mean by extremely low racial esteem is that a lot of times, like UTC no longer recruits out of predominantly Black high schools, right? So like 6 or 7 years ago, they stopped doing it. So we have 1,500 fewer Black students than we had 6 years ago. So the students I get now, they came from predominantly white high schools and have a hard time identifying or connecting with other Black people. And then the other extreme that I had probably years before that was extremely narcissistic, that their race became God, right? And they was very pro, but they didn't actually learn how to filter through all those things. So I went to 2 different types of extremes, and you almost got to have a fluid ministry. You got to be able to adjust your ministry based on where Black students are at, and that comes from the observing, that comes from all the things that we talked about before. Racially competitive, like one thing that UTC does, they actually reward Black organizations, like what they say, the most impactful organization on campus. So they would actually compete against each other, like sabotaging just to get this report. And one of the things about it is, and this is not even to speak arrogantly, we don't want it last 3 years. But listen, I was telling them, I said, seek first the kingdom of God and all these things were brought unto you. Right? You know what I'm saying? So we're not trying to win it. Like, I'm the main person teaching them don't compete, but we always win it. But all right, we're not sabotaging other groups, but I just noticed how much they just like compete against each other for certain rewards that the campus said they give. When I say self-hatred and delete other self-sabotage behavior patterns that, like, especially when I deal with some of my fraternities, a lot of them are alcoholics, man. And we're dealing with, and because of this situation, a lot of them don't graduate, right? And I'm dealing with a couple of them now. Like, I got one guy, he was selling weed in school, and he's about to get transferred out. So there's a lot of different things that are trendy and they have attached to their personality, and they do it, and it's just like helping them. Like, one of the things is that I don't always preach condemnation, but I do challenge, and I try to look more like with Christ, that it wasn't always about like condemning, but it was affirming and challenging certain aspects that you see that not only wrong for them, but ultimately doesn't glorify God, to challenge those things. Let's see where I'm at. I'm gonna get to the Q&A part of it. That didn't mean to happen. I knew something. I said I ain't gonna make it all the way through here without something correct. There we go. All right. So I share briefly, and I'm back in Nehemiah, about this Sanballat and Tobias personalities. One of the things, if you ever decide to do Bible study around cultural issues, or even like I do, go into the inner city middle school, you're going to have people who disagree with what you're doing, because it's not what they would consider a traditional ministry, right? And the problem with Sanballat and Tobias, they had a vested interest in seeing a certain group dysfunctional, that making that group functional again actually will cause more problems, right? Like, I even tell my students, because the unique thing about Orchard Knob Middle School, they built a juvenile right in front of the school, like almost like here's a preview of where you're going, right? And we talked about like the school to prison pipeline, and this even makes it more vivid. So actually, by becoming the good news to these young people, you can ultimately change their destiny or get that juvenile destroyed, right? So they no longer need to build it, at least in front of this particular school. But a lot of the complaints that I got wasn't from InterVarsity. It wasn't even from people in the city. It was from other campus ministers. They would always just, and here go just some of them I just listed. Some of them would tell me, yo, he's not gospel centered, because he doesn't do the decision making the way we do the decision making, that he becomes a bearer of the good news and speak about the good news. And, you just got to kind of endure those things. You got to be able to internalize exactly what the gospel is, and, bring a liberty to those who are oppressed, going to the least of these. You got to really take in what Christ's mission and methods was, and why he chose to use those methods. And usually people who was in opposition to Christ was people who stood from afar and judged, right? So, you're in a good place if they start judging you for doing a good work. Secondly, they're all hypocrites. A lot of the campus ministry would say that, because I'm reaching out to the unchurched. I'm reaching out to, this isn't, no disrespect, this isn't low-hanging fruit here. These are students that are coming with a lot of problems, a lot of issues. I remember, because I would do some Bible studies, and some of the fraternity dudes is actually a house that they would live in, and it's weed, it's everything. And I remember one of them, it was so bad, it was raining outside, storming, and they had a lamp, just a lamp lighting the whole area. And we just talking, and one of them kicked the lamp, so it's dark and it's raining, and it's everything that's going on. I'm like, oh man, but they watched as I endured their situation and still carried it out. But yeah, they would say that your students aren't like our students, and that's true, because I'm getting them from a different place, and we're slowly going through a discipleship cycle. It may not come out as quick as those who may have a Christian background, because they have a lot of more questions. Okay, one of them told me a campus minister only focus on campus work. I don't even need to address that. That was yeah. I didn't know you addressed that. One of the things is, and I'm not going to get on this soapbox, but it's just like the stuff I experienced. I was like, listen, I work for InterVarsity, right? You work for who you work for. So how can you tell me what I need to do? So InterVarsity, and none of these complaints came from IV. These are, I don't want to mention other groups, but when they said 2030, a lot of them, I ain't gonna get into that, but they felt like they had access to me. All right, a pastor actually told me, because we do address cultural issues, he had a problem. He said, just teach the Bible and don't teach cultural issues, don't teach the racial stuff, don't teach all these particular things, just the Bible. And my response I said, okay, I'm gonna teach about a group of people who was in a dominant culture. They got their name changed to reflect that dominant culture. Their food was dictated to them. They was put in a particular space. He said, there you go. I said, no, that's Daniel 1, right? You can't even read the Bible without engaging dominant and subdominant groups. And usually the same thing happens. Everybody's not experiencing life the same, right? Like even in Jesus' days, the Romans wouldn't experience life like the Jews, right? Like there was different people experiencing life differently. So that's why you have to adjust your message based on that. So, but yeah, that was a pastor that said that. But here's the main thing that I do, and I think this what draws the most fruit, and this came from Nehemiah, is that I keep my mind on the work. That I do address those that oppose, but my primary focus in what I need to do. And I know what God has called me to do, and it's really to create a biblical and a cultural framework to keep these kids from destroying themselves.